Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Is a man not entitled to take a break from creating comic book videos for the YouTubes? Hello everyone. I have been gone for a week and it seems like everybody is panicking like I am dead. No, I am not dead. I need a break from doing this just like everybody else. And so I took my break for a week and we are back to making videos. And in this video, we are covering the story where Dormammu becomes the Herald of Galactus, almost said Doctor Strange. And it's actually amazing. So here's a funny thing. When it comes to Doctor Strange as a comic book character, for the average person, it usually seems like it's not worth the price of admission, right? Where it's just kind of like, nah, and I'll go do something else instead. It really seems to feel like that, like when it comes, because the Doctor Strange line of comics really are for just a particular kind of comic book fan. Now, if you like magic and mysticism, of course it's for you. But if you're not a huge fan of that, you don't really want to have a whole lot to do with it. And that's kind of one of the things that Mark Waid sort of hits on to a degree, right? Like he picks up this story and he's just kind of like, he has Doctor Strange sort of musing to himself, right? And it's just kind of like, I've pretty much done everything, and so I'm bored now. Because in reality, that's the nature of Doctor Strange comics, right? He's one of these weird characters. He's the master of the mystic arts, and it's kind of like I know the most about magic, than anybody else in the universe. But it's interesting because the question he kind of asks here is like, is there no real adventure left anymore? Like, is there really nothing for me to do? Like, is this kind of it? Like, I'm just going to be sitting in the house watching The View and waiting for something to happen. And then he's suddenly met by the arrival of a guy named Zoloz. Now, here's a cool thing. Zoloz is a guy who comes from a planet that Galactus has basically visited, right? Like he's part of a group called the Zeraxians, and the result is that Galactus is literally going to consume their world. And so what his people ended up doing was that as a mage himself, they basically took all of their energies, dumped it into him, and the result is that he's been sent here now because when they scanned through the mind of Galactus to figure out what his weakness was, the only thing they could find was Earth. Now, this is why things are interesting, because Zoloz shows up here believing that Earth has someone powerful enough to defeat Galactus, and they do. I mean, you got the Molecule Man, Owen Reese, you've got Franklin Richards, who's really more akin to Galactus. Like, they're really more counterparts now, in these days, than they are like, one being more powerful than the other. Oh, I guess the future version of Franklin is basically like a counterpart to Galactus. But still, like, as we know as the reader, the reason why Galactus sees Earth as a weakness is because of like the totality of the heroes on it. And that's what you would need. Like, you would literally need like all the heroes on Earth to band together, fly to the other side of the universe and like defeat Galactus, right? But like, they're not going to, because it's just the natural role of Galactus. And that's what Zoloz doesn't get, is literally he just kind of starts like getting into this fight with Doctor Strange, and of course basically starts using his abilities to like absorb magical energy to like absorb all of Doctor Strange's duplicates into himself. It's really one of these things where it's like every step that Doctor Strange takes, this guy's powerful enough to overcome. And of course that leads into him discovering like the various books of Doctor Strange and then absorbing all their knowledge. Now, I want to talk about this for a second. When it comes to magic in Marvel Comics, there was the way that things used to be, and then there's essentially kind of like the way things are now, right? So the way that things used to be is that you had essentially just like ambient energy out there. Anybody who has the power to tap into like reality warping is harnessing the fundamental energies of the universe, is basically what it is, right? So like if the universe is clay, then they're essentially like tapping into and manipulating that clay is literally what they're doing. When it comes to like telepathy, it's tapping into the ambient energies, basically tapping into the ability to access the astral plane, more or less, access the realm where like thoughts go to as they pass from one location to the next, and then in turn, harness those thoughts to do whatever it is that you want to do, control them, wipe them out of somebody's head, whatever the case is. Then there's the way that they exist now, right? So like magic was just kind of energy that was there and you could manipulate it. In Ultimates Volume 2, issue number 100 by Al Ewing, what he said was that magic actually never used to exist. It wasn't until the various, the multiverse was destroyed and recreated and destroyed and recreated, when it was destroyed and remade for the 5th time, that version of eternity had basically like brought magic into the main Marvel universe and said, okay, magic is here now and people can use it. Of course, that multiverse was destroyed and recreated again, but the fact remains, like, that's when magic started being brought in and people had the ability to access it. So we know, like, of all the different versions of the multiverse that have ever existed, there was never a Doctor Strange until you got to the 5th version. Again, it's a little bit of a historical thing there, but the fact remains that what you have here in this day and age is essentially just like a wide array of different people tapping into a wide array of different powers. Now, that was always the case, but having somebody come along who's more powerful than Doctor Strange really highlights two things. One, that of course there are people out there who can use magic in a more adept way than Doctor Strange, and two, 2, Doctor Strange is the Sorcerer Supreme in name only. Now, that's the indication that's put off here. That's the basis behind like what's being told, because basically this guy's kind of like, you have all these forms of magical energy here. Like you have all these things that you could use. Why don't you just use them all? Now, what this does is it kind of moves into the second part of that discussion and says, okay, the difference here is that where Doctor Strange could absorb all these forms of energy into himself, all these magical principles, and then use them for his own ends, who knows what kind of chaos would erupt because of it. And so that's the true nature of Doctor Strange. Yes, he could acquire absolute power. Is it a good idea? No. Now, again, this kind of flies in the face of a lot of stories we've seen before, right? Like Doctor Strange basically going to Sinner's Market and then bartering 100% of his soul for 100% of his power, or at least trying. But we only know that, well, at least we do know, Doctor Strange only does that in like the most extreme circumstances, right? Like the Beyonder comes back and wants to attack Earth. Okay, well then he'll do whatever he needs to do in order to make that happen. But under a normal circumstance, you can't do that. At the same time, it's also Zoloz not really understanding the nature of Galactus. It's his role in the cosmos, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. If Galactus comes rolling up on your place and is going to start like consuming your entire planet, sorry about your luck. That's just the way it goes. Nice knowing you. Like it's basically it, just like flee while you can, but it's the role of Galactus. He's a fundamental part of the universe. And so again, like we know that from a wide array of different stories, but of course Zoloz doesn't. And so basically channeling all these magical energies, he literally opens a portal in the main Marvel universe and whisks Galactus away to like the depths of the mystic realms. What this means is Galactus is now in the realm of like Dormammu, and he's in the realm of like Nightmare. He's in the realm of like all these basic mystical, these mystical forces that are out there, and there's no guess as to what, like there's no telling what in the world is going to happen. And that's what Doctor Strange kind of freaks out about, right? Like Galactus is a being of pure science, right? Like he serves a purpose. It is, I am a being who travels around the cosmos, and I serve two purposes. The first is that I consume planets that can sustain life-sustaining energy so that the Celestials cannot plant their eggs in like every single planet across the cosmos and overrun the universe. And I also do this because I'm a gatekeeper, right? If I die, Abraxas comes out, and Abraxas will basically wipe out the entire multiverse. Those of you guys who don't know about Abraxas, he's essentially just like the representation of the multiverse's destruction, right? Like there was a story in the 2000s where Galactus died, where he was allowed to die. Basically, it was kind of like, hey, look, if I die, terrible things will happen, and it was allowed to die, or he was allowed to die, and then in turn, like basically you find out that like Abraxas, this being that represents destruction in the multiverse, breaks out of this kind of prison he's always been in, and then he in turn starts traveling around like the multiverse, killing every version of Galactus that he finds. So again, it was kind of crazy. It was a pretty wonky story, but suffice it to say, Abraxas is insanely powerful. Like it's nuts how powerful he is. But to take someone like that, like Galactus, and then throw him into the mystic depths, there's no telling what would happen. That's exactly what Strange says. And so when he gets in there with all this magical arms and armory and so on and so forth, then suddenly he's met by like this giant stampede of people who are, or I guess beings who are all just fleeing for their lives, because Galactus, like the first thing he does is start consuming like energy off of one of these planets. Galactus starts doing exactly what Galactus is doing. Now, here's a funny thing. Strange shows up here and says, hey, look, man, you can't necessarily do that. Now, the fact that Galactus addresses him directly is a little bit astounding, and that's kind of one of the funny things that Wade talks about here, right? Because we know from Marvel Comics, Galactus never usually addresses just like a being, like a normal person, because he doesn't really care. He's like, I mean, why would I care enough to talk to you? One, there's nothing you could probably tell me that would interest me intellectually, right? I mean, you're no Reed Richards. And two, like, you're not really powerful enough to stop me or challenge me, so why do I care? But Galactus literally addresses him and is like, why am I here? So it's just kind of like, okay, Galactus is trying to get a feel for his surroundings, trying to figure out like what's going on, why he's here, all that kind of good stuff. Not only that, what's happened is he's basically been like sent to a particular place in the depths of the mystic realm and then bound inside of a prison. And so he has like these little small planetoids here and there, but those aren't enough to do anything for him. And so what he basically does is like break out of his prison and into like the greater depths. Then like the first person he runs into, or the first thing he runs into, is Missin Hagorath. Now Missin Hagorath is what's referred to as the Beast of Pain, but there's no real history to go on here because this is the first time he's ever been seen. And then he dies because it's like it's like, okay, so that guy's gone. But what this is actually Mark Waid proving a very important point. When it comes to Galactus as a character, it's largely assumed he just absorbs the ambient energies of a life-sustaining planet and then moves on. What this actually confirms is something that we, I guess, maybe always kind of knew in the back of our heads, but never really thought about, that Galactus can absorb energy off of beings. And that's exactly what happens here, right? Like this Beast of Pain goes to attack Galactus and then basically shows him like, I have a huge amount of energy stored inside of me, and in turn Galactus absorbs it all out of him. Now, it could very well just be be that this guy's kind of like a conduit for magical energy, which means like he actually stores that energy inside of him, as opposed to being like Doctor Strange where he just reaches out and touches it and harnesses it. It could be that way. We don't really know, but whatever the basis behind him is, all this energy that he possesses at his disposal, Galactus absorbs it. And that's when Doctor Strange begins to realize that a very dangerous thing is happening. With Galactus going through and absorbing all these magical energies that exist either in planets or in people inside this universe, that what he's basically doing is tapping into a source of energy that he's not really familiar with, and that even Doctor Strange himself doesn't really know what effect it'll have, right? I mean, like, what this is like Galactus going out, it's like you going out and eating like a standard Western diet every day, right? Like 50% protein, 25% fats, and like 25% carbs or something along those lines, 30% fats and 20% carbs or 50, whatever the case is. You going out and in turn like consuming a standard Western diet, and then just suddenly jumping into like a random diet, like an exotic diet with no indication of what it'll do to you, right? Like it's the best example I could think of, but that's basically it here. It's literally what's going on. Galactus's form is predicated on consuming life-sustaining energies in a universe he was born into. So he was born for that purpose. He was not born for the purpose of consuming magical energy. Who knows what kind of situation that's going to create? So of course, Doctor Strange binds Galactus and is able to do it for a pretty good chunk of time. But again, we're talking about Galactus. So the concern that he has is, I'm not going to be able to keep this guy bound forever. Like eventually he's going to break out. And of course, like Galactus begins to, and then that's when his binds are reestablished again. And we're met with the arrival of Clea. Now, Clea is a character that we haven't talked about ever, and we've never had a reason to, because she hasn't appeared in a very long time. Anyway, the basis behind this really actually goes into the origin of two beings, Umar and Dormammu. Now, back in the old Strange Tale comics, when Dormammu first popped up, what you got was the origin of his character shortly after, around that time, but you also learned about a group called the Faltine. Now, the Faltine, F-A-L-T-I-N-E, this is a group that existed in another dimension and was naturally adept at wielding magical energy. The issue is that Dormammu and Umar wanted like physical pleasures, more or less, and of course that was kind of banished because they were beings composed of like spiritual form. And so because of that, they basically ended up killing Cenifer, I think, killing their creator, and then in turn they like were banished to the dark dimension. Now the dark dimension at the time was ruled by a guy named King Ulnar. He was like a warlord or something like that. Anyway, basically like Umar and Dormammu showed up in the dark dimension and were kind of like, okay, so like this is our place now. And using like subterfuge and being deceptive, they basically started to use King Ulnar as a way to essentially like doom his own people, the Mercs. At least I'm pretty sure that's how it's pronounced, Mercs. I think it's M-H-U-U-R-K-S, I think is how you pronounce it or how you spell it. But basically this was a group that like was a normal inhabitant of the dark dimension, and then in turn could also use magical energy. What ended up happening here is that with Dormammu and Umar taking over, and then Dormammu basically going into his Faltine form, which is his energy-based form, and then Umar maintaining her human form, this led to Umar engaging in a affair of sorts with one of the servants of Dormammu, and this basically led to the birth of Clea. And so Clea is technically the rightful heir to the throne of the dark dimension. So think of it like Katana from Mortal Kombat, basically. But she's technically the rightful heir to the dark dimension, but she doesn't really take it because Dormammu currently rules it. So unless she was able to muster a sizable force that was powerful enough to take out Dormammu in his own dimension, which is probably never going to happen, in turn, like she would just basically kind of reside there. Now, she and Doctor Strange teamed up a couple times, and then like the second or third time it happened, they fell in love. She became a student of Doctor Strange, and then eventually he married her and she became his wife. So now she's his ex-wife. So, but basically just take it as, his ex-wife is here in order to help him, which is kind of weird. But what they end up doing is basically saying like, what we need is an alliance of people. Like we basically need an alliance of magic wielders out there, some of the most powerful people in existence, in order to like get rid of Galactus and banish him from here. And so that's when you bring in Umar. Now, Umar is synonymous with deception, right? I mean, that's the nature of her character. She's the sister of Dormammu. It's one of these things where like she's always trying to like topple her brother and take his place, or she just really kind of wants to be second place and just wants to sort of manipulate things behind the scenes. Her schemes and motivations really never make sense to anybody but herself, and she's insanely powerful. But it's one of the funny things that we're seeing here is that like Galactus is more powerful, and that's kind of the cool thing, is because what they're doing is they're literally going through and like they're like Galactus is kind of being ravaged by the very energies he's consuming. And so it seems like one of these things where the more energy he consumes, the more it seems to consume him. Now, the reality of this is Doctor Strange looks at that and says, no, it's not really that. I mean, I guess he is kind of being consumed, but Galactus is changing. And the reason why is because Galactus is actually a being of pure energy. That's one of the things to bear in mind. Galactus doesn't really have a true physical form. He did at one point, but when he was born into the main Marvel universe as Galactus, he was born as a being of pure energy. That's why it is, whenever Galactus shows up on the doorstep of a race's planet and he's going to consume their planet, he's a mirror to them, right? So like the Skrulls will see a Skrull version of Galactus, the Kree will see a Kree version of Galactus, but it's the outfit he wears and the fact that he's there to consume their planet that makes him so terrifying. Now, of course, we found that out in the trial of Reed Richards way back in the 1980s, whenever it was that story came out. But the overall gist behind this is that what's happening is the normal energies that make up Galactus, the energies of a positive universe, basically like the main Marvel universe, are slowly being replaced by these exotic energies he's consuming, right? So it's like having a bottle of water and then dropping some iodine inside, right? Like some dye of some kind. It's going to start to permeate out and then eventually change the water if you put enough in there. And that's what's happening here. Galactus is essentially being poisoned by magical energy. And so what ends up happening is Doctor Strange basically says, okay, fine. In this case, like we can't have you running around and consuming like all these life-sustaining planets because we have no idea what effect it's going to have on you, like in the extreme, if you get to the wrong one. So I will do two things. One, I will basically become your new Herald, go out and try to find a planet that is uninhabited. And two, I will try to make sure the uninhabited planet I find will keep you sustained, but will not continue to poison you the way that like all these other planets have been consuming you. And that's why it's kind of a crazy thing, because Galactus is just sort of falling apart, more or less. And so what ends up happening here is you end up having like Dormammu, who's basically visited like by Misnaha Gorath. And it's kind of like, hey, look, like there's this crazy powerful being who's consuming everything. You have to stop him. And that's when we end up finding out Dormammu's already aware of Galactus. Like he's already aware of the power Galactus has, and he's already aware of like what he's capable of. And like he's already making moves against Galactus to be able to like defeat him. And that's kind of the crazy thing here, is because where Doctor Strange is sort of hopping around and going from world to world trying to find different locations, you have like the forces of Umar who are traveling around, and they actually end up running up on Nightmare. Now, Nightmare is actually a cool guy. So in Marvel Comics, the way this works is that whenever you lay down and go to sleep, if you have a nightmare, those nightmares feed the actual nightmare dimension, which powers the guy Nightmare, but there's also a potential for them to be kind of fed back to you in the extreme. And that's one of the reasons why Nightmare is really considered to be like an immortal and indestructible being. So long as beings exist and they can dream, then Nightmare can exist because they will have nightmares. The only way to really to get Nightmare to a point where he can be defeated is to wipe out all sentient life. But you'd have to essentially blink out the universe, which would kill him anyway, because literally it's the dreams of like all beings in existence, and then potentially the dreams in the future. So like, or at least the nightmares of people in the future. It's really weird and it's really finicky, but basically if they got Nightmare on their side, well, it may not necessarily be enough to like overpower Galactus in his entirety and like destroy him because he's just so amped up with all this magical power. It would certainly be enough to create like some havoc. And so where basically Doctor Strange ends up finally locating a planet and then grabs Galactus and brings him back, what they end up finding out is there's all these small little instances of people getting in their way of trying to like slow Galactus down. And eventually he ends up having to invoke his power and start attacking these guys, which of course begins to depower him a little bit more. Now, eventually we end up finding out that like once they get to this planet and like Galactus goes to consume it, immediately right off the bat, we end up finding out something is wrong, that this planet has been tainted. And that's when we end up finding out Dormammu is the one behind it, that Dormammu is the new Herald of Galactus, and that Dormammu tampered with this planet so that when Galactus went to consume it, it would amp him up, but it would also twist him and screw him up and basically become kind of a servant to Dormammu, but at the same time, like Dormammu becoming a Herald of Galactus. The other half of this is that when Doctor Strange sits down and says, okay, so like something else has to be going on here, right? Like, yes, Dormammu is very, very powerful, but like by himself, at least that seems to be the indication, by himself, Dormammu's not necessarily powerful enough to stop Galactus. Now, we actually don't know this. We can't really argue either way, because the reality of this is that they've never met, and they're two beings from two distinctly different dimensions. I mean, I guess you can find some way to kind of, move the pieces around and cook the books so that some argument can be made, but the reality is that, like, we've never seen this happen before. We've never seen a full-on conflict between Galactus and Dormammu, and so it's really kind of creating a narrative and creating a standard and saying, okay, so like, definitively, Dormammu is no more powerful than Galactus, right? Like Galactus is more powerful than Dormammu, essentially. Like, that's really kind of what's being said here. And that the other way to kind of manipulate this, the other kind of power that was needed came from Mephisto, as it always does. But basically the gist behind this is that the alliance that was formed between Dormammu and Mephisto, that what this would basically mean is that Dormammu would conquer planets and continue to expand his reign, his kingdom, right? Like outside of the dark dimension and into other places in the mystic realms. And then like expand his kingdom. But every single world that is consumed and the people who perish basically expand Mephisto's realm. Now, this is kind of the crazy thing. Mephisto doesn't really take souls in the traditional sense. Mephisto's version, like his section of hell is essentially like expanded by people who sold their souls for some particular deed, right? Like whether it was money or like success or power or something along those lines. But they basically bargained with Mephisto, not realizing that like when everything was done, Mephisto would take their soul to his realm. That's really what his version of hell is consigned for. It's not just everyone who dies just automatically goes to where Mephisto's at. Presumably it's those individuals that he probably made pacts with, which he could. I mean, presumably Mephisto could use his almost infinite power to show up and basically appear to every single person who's basically dying on the planet at the same time and saying like, you know, I can do this. I can basically, you know, I can save you. All you have to do is say yes. And they say, okay, like they basically make a deal with Mephisto. And then when they all end up dying anyway, and they show up in his realm and he's like, you know, they're like, well, I thought you were going to save us. And it's like, I did. I saved you for my realm, you know, and then just bam, leave him there or something along those lines. I mean, presumably he could do that. I mean, he's almost infinitely powerful, but that's basically what's going on. Dormammu and Mephisto are now working in tandem together. And that Dormammu is now the Herald of Galactus, taking him from planet to planet and basically showing him all the best worlds to feed on, presumably all the worlds that Dormammu wants to go after. But it's actually pretty beast. Like, I'm pretty excited about this. Like, I want to see them fight. That's what I want to see, like Galactus versus Dormammu. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explain, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.